Hey everybody, welcome back to Gaijin Guided. And this time I wanted to tell you a little bit about a trip I took today. uh, well, I don't know if I'd really call it a trip, it's more like a stroll. Um, there's a park across the street from where I live, and this week they're having I would call it a landscaping show. There's people there selling all kinds of trees and things like that, um, flowers and stuff, vegetables, fruit. You can plant in your garden, in your backyard. Um, Interestingly enough, there are also people there selling tombstones. And hilariously, there's a grave marker there that I kid you not is in the shape of Hello Kitty. And it's not a small thing either. This thing has to be probably on like waist height on most people. If you check my Twitter, you can see a picture of that. And boy, was I weirded out when I saw that. I really did want to take a video of it, but people here can sometimes be really twitchy about folks waving around cameras and recording stuff. And while it's very unlikely anybody would have actually said anything to me, you just don't want to do that just to not create a bad impression of foreigners. So it's one of those things you really, really need to be sensitive to here. Um, and they had also there were a few people who were selling like koi for fish ponds, koi ponds. Um, a full-grown koi could go for like $100, if I remember right. Oh wait, no, I take that back. It was more like $10 for a koi. And there were also people selling tea. They had your usual food stands. Uh, the third was Setsubo here in Japan, which is kind of a cleanse day of cleansing. It's where people dress up like Oni, and other people will run around and throw beans at them, while basically chanting like "evil out, good fortune, good spirits in." It's one of the more interesting Japanese holidays that you don't really hear about as much. But one of those people had some sort of what they called a Setsubo burger. I'm trying to cut back on the greasy food, so I took a pass on that one. But it did certainly look interesting. It had like an egg, I think, on there, and something that I think was maybe bacon. It's sometimes hard to tell. And then there's the usual, Japanese festival food stands where you see just like fried, God only knows what. Japanese food is generally quite healthy, but make no mistake, people here love their fried, greasy food too. Um, there were also a bunch of several stalls selling just sort of things like clothes, like tradition, a lot of it looked like jinbeis to me, which are sort of like casual light kimonos, uh, lots of hats. And there were a few people who were just selling sort of like real kind of just sort of I hesitate to call it junk stuff, but it's like the sort of things you find at Goodwill. Like there's power tools, lots of old dishes and decorations and things like that. Some of which looked really really cool. And I ended up picking up one thing from one of those stores. It was this little Buddha statue. It's got a base that goes with it that looks really nice too. The statue itself, it's got a couple of nicks and stuff on the face. Probably got dropped or something at some point, but it looks really nice. And this is something I've kind of been wanting to have just to decorate my apartment for a long time because I used to have a similar statue back in America, but I was never able to find one until today that really kind of spoke to my particular tastes. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh man, I've got to get it. I got to get it now. And I wanted to look around a little more. I knew there were more places like that. Um, so I wanted to look around a little bit more, but I came back like 20 minutes later and picked it up because it's like, man, if somebody buys this while I'm just out wandering around, I'm going to be so annoyed with myself. And while I was there, I also picked up this nice cute little mini cactus. This was like 400 yen. And I used to have a cactus in my apartment in Korea, and I kind of missed it. And it does come with some care instructions that are all in Japanese, which I need to sit down and translate later on, probably with more than a little assistance from my smartphone and Google Translate. But um, I'm kind of glad to have a plant again. I'm not really a plant person. That's kind of why I like cacti. They're very easy to take care of. But it just kind of feels nice to have some greenery around the place. But anyway, while I was looking through one of these stands, I kept finding a whole bunch of stuff, like medals and whatnot, that were from the Lions Club. Lions Club is a big international organization, and they're here in Japan. And there were a lot of like these old things from like meetings that happened like back in like 1979, 1980. I even found kind of one of those sort of like European style, like Swedish style. I know Swedish cups have them, but sort of like long style caps that you sometimes see, and you sometimes see military people wear them. And they were all decorated with like pins and stuff from like various Lions Club meetings that this person had gone to. There was like one from like Brazil in like the early 80s and stuff like that. And they also had a whole bunch of like medals, like little, like legit medals, like you would see on a soldier, but they were from the Lions Club. And just looking at that, I even found one that I think might have actually had the person's name on it in English, oddly enough. And there were also some medals that had like just Japanese characters that I assume are exclusive to the Japanese branch of this club. But just nonetheless, I just looked at this, and clearly this stuff belonged to somebody who was very, very committed to the Lions Club. And again, I don't really know much about the Lions Club. But clearly this was somebody who was very committed, probably pretty high rank in the group. And you know, these a lot of these medals, especially, were like put in boxes. They even had like numbers on them and everything. And I just couldn't help but look at this and think like, man, this was something that this person, whoever they were, was really, really committed to. And now here it's basically being sold as junk, you know, as like little collectibles at a landscaping meeting. It's sort of like almost, yeah, I mean, it's like it's ended up in like the dollar bin at a store. Especially when I was looking at that hat, I just kept thinking like, you know, this is all stuff that clearly meant a great deal to whoever this person that belonged to, and now look at where it's ended up. You know, I used to live right by a Goodwill. I mean, literally, I could look out my window and I would see the loading dock of the Goodwill, where people would come by and drop off stuff. And more than a few times, I would see people, like a family, pull up in like a truck or a minivan and just unload box after box of stuff. And whenever I would see that stuff, I would always think like, ooh, man, it's like grandma died and they're getting rid of her stuff. And okay, I was probably being a little inappropriately flippant there, but you know, this was a store that, because I lived right there, I would be in there like at least 2 or 3 times a week, just sort of looking for anything cool. And I did pick up quite a lot of cool stuff. But it was always a little sad. I mean, you know, people die and their family has to move on. But it is kind of sad to think that, you know, so much stuff from a person's life can end up just being stuck in a box and donated, or just to someone for free to make a couple of bucks, or end up basically at a swap meet store going for pennies. I mean, whoever this guy was, his hat and his medals, they clearly meant a great deal to this guy. And, you know, here they are just being sold as like, oh, amusing little knickknacks to people. I mean, I'm not trying to condemn anybody for this, not the people who are selling it, not the people who donate stuff like that, not anybody who buys it. It just kind of goes to show you how temporary and transitory life can be. And it also reminded me of something that happened when I was a kid, like maybe around 12 years old. And my grandmother came back from work one day, and she gave me this box of stuff, and it was like patches and stuff, sort of like that you see sewn on people's military uniforms. And she said, "Oh, well, one of the women I work with wanted me to give these to you." And I'm like, okay, thanks. Why? And she said, "Well, her son is kind of a screw up, and she wanted somebody who would appreciate these things to have them." Now, even as a kid, I had a little bit of an interest in World War II, just because like my grandfather was a pilot during that time, and my other grandfather, he was basically too young to fight at the time, but he told me a little bit about what life was like back in America then. So I was a little interested in this, but I wasn't like a military aficionado by any way, shape, or form. But just the fact that this lady basically gave stuff that, and this was from like the woman that worked, my grandmother worked with, had clearly, spent a good number of years of her life in the military. And just the fact that she would basically pass these off to somebody like me, I'd never met this lady. I didn't even know her name. But that she would just give these things away to somebody, things that doubtlessly meant a great deal to her, to somebody she doesn't even know, just because her own son is such a screw up. I mean, again, that just sort of really shows you how invested in certain things we can be. Now, I'm a big believer in this one line from Fight Club, and there are a lot of criticisms you can level at Fight Club. But one thing from that movie that I remember hearing that really, really struck me was that line where they say, "The things you own you." And that kind of really struck a chord with me about how, material possessions can really weigh you down. But, nonetheless, it's hard not to get attached to certain things in life, especially things that are things that we've earned through a lot of work. I remember once when I was when I'd been out of college shortly, I came by my family's house and they were, organizing some stuff and moving things around, and I was checking a box trying to find something of mine that had gotten packed away by mistake. And I was quite displeased to find that my grandfather had stuck my college diploma in a box. Yeah, I spent literally years of my life trying to get that diploma, and here it is just stuck in a box. I kind of went and basically yelled at my grandfather for a little while. I also found my high school diploma in that box too, so I was even doubly angry there. And then I always made sure to make sure I knew personally exactly where those were so that that didn't happen again. But kind of getting back to it, like I said, it is interesting to see these things that clearly meant so much to someone, and doubtlessly that person has passed away, and now here it is. I mean, if you look at the sort of things you see in museums, like pots and other little odds and ends, to us they're just historical treasures, items of things from the history. But to the people of the past, those were just like, hey, that's mine. And in a lot of ways, the stuff that ends up in museums is, the exception. A lot of stuff just gets thrown away and ends up as junk. So I couldn't help but just think about how temporary so much of life is, and how even these things that we invest so much in, once we're gone, they so often become just so much junk, even to the people that we love. And it's a sad and sobering thought, but that's the way life is. Everyone gets their time on the stage, and then we have to get off to make room for the next players. I guess it's kind of things like this are good reminders to value really your time while you're here, because your time will end one day, and you too will one day be a memory. and one day, it will just be the things that you have left behind that will still be here, and even those are very, very transitory as well. So I'm going to call it here on that surprisingly morbid note. So guys, as always, please join me on Tumblr at Gaijin Gaiden, and also join me on Twitter at Gaijin Gaiden, where I will be posting some of interesting pictures that I took at that particular event. So until next time, guys, take care and have a good one.